A king murdered on a toilet, another impaled at his own dinner party, one who sent his brother to drown in a boat without oars, and a teenage monarch who ditched his own coronation to hook up with a noblewoman while his guests waited. This is the real history of England's first kings. No dragons, no fiction, just the wildest, most insane stories you've never heard in history class. And it all starts with the man who united England for the very first time. King Athelstan. Athelstan reigned from the years 927 to 939, the first true king of all England. Now, you'd think the guy who united an entire nation would be celebrated as a hero, right? Well, he was. But he also carried a guilt so crushing that he never married and spent the rest of his life in penance. Why? Because he murdered his own half-brother. Athelstan's half-brother, Edwin, was accused of plotting against him. Whether the conspiracy was real or fabricated, we'll never know. But Athelstan's response was medieval brutality at its finest. He didn't just execute Edwin. No, that would be too merciful. Instead, he forced Edwin onto a boat without any oars and had him pushed out to sea.
Poor Edwin either drowned when the boat eventually sank, or, according to some sources, he couldn't take it anymore and jumped overboard to end it himself. The murder haunted Athelstan. He did public penance, gave generously to churches, and never took a wife or produced heirs. The first king of all England died alone, tormented by what he'd done to his own flesh and blood. But if you think family drama couldn't get any worse, meet Edmund I. He reigned from the years 939 to 946 as Athelstan's successor and more alive half-brother. Edmund had a pretty solid run as king. He was a capable military leader, fought off Viking invasions, and generally kept the peace. But his reign came to an absolutely shocking end, and it happened at his own party. The year was 946. Edmund was hosting a feast at Pucklechurch in Gloucestershire. Everyone's having a good time, there's food, there's drink, it's all very merry. Then a man named Leofor shows up. Now, Leofor was an exile, a convicted criminal who had been banished from Edmund's lands. Showing up at the king's feast? That's not bold, it's incredibly foolish. But Leofor didn't care. He crashed the party and started helping himself to the food and drink. When Edmund spotted him, the king was furious. He didn't call his guards. He didn't order an arrest. No, Edmund decided to personally handle this. He got up from his seat and physically tried to drag Leofor out of the hall himself. Bad move. In the ensuing struggle, Leofor pulled out a knife and impaled the king, not once, but multiple times. Edmund I, King of England, died right there on the floor of his own feast hall, murdered by a party crasher in what was essentially a bar brawl. Next up, Eadred. King Eadred reigned from 946 to 955, but didn't die in a dramatic murder or battle. But what he lived with might be even more disturbing. Eadred suffered from a digestive disease so severe that he physically could not swallow his food. Imagine being the King of England and not being able to enjoy a single feast. But here's where it gets really grotesque. Eadred's solution was to chew his food thoroughly, sucking all of the juices out of it before spitting it out. And his servants? They would eat his chewed, regurgitated food. Yes, you heard that right. The king's leftovers, pre-chewed, spit-out food, were consumed by his attendants. Whether this was considered an honour, a necessity, or just incredibly awkward, we can only speculate. But meal times at Eadred's court must have been absolutely horrifying to witness. Despite this debilitating condition, Eadred was actually a pretty effective king. He successfully maintained control over England and dealt with rebellions in the north.
He died of natural causes, likely related to his disease, in 955. Now, moving on from a king who couldn't eat to one who couldn't keep it in his pants. Meet King Edwig, who reigned from 955 to 959, also known as Edwig the Fair. Edwig was only 15 years old when he was crowned king, and on the day of his coronation, he did something so scandalous that it defined his entire reign. Picture this. It's coronation day. The ceremony is over, and now there's a massive feast with all the most important nobles, bishops, and advisors in the kingdom. Everyone's gathered to celebrate their new king. But where's Edwig? He's nowhere to be found. The guests start murmuring. The Archbishop of Canterbury, a man named Dunstan, is getting increasingly irritated. Finally, Dunstan decides enough is enough. He goes looking for the teenage king and finds him in a private chamber with a noblewoman named Ælfgifu. Even worse, some sources say her mother, Athelstan, was also in the room. The king had ditched his own coronation feast to have it off with a woman. Dunstan, absolutely furious, physically dragged the king back to the feast. This was a walk of shame like no other. The new King of England being marched back to his own party by an angry bishop. This incident had consequences. Edwig later exiled Dunstan for the humiliation, but the story spread, and Edwig's reputation never recovered. Despite being called the Fair for his good looks, he's remembered far more for what happened on his coronation day. Edwig died in 959 at only around 19 years old, possibly from illness. His brief and scandal-plagued reign giving way to his younger brother Edgar, better known as Edgar the Peaceful. It's quite an ironic nickname when you learn what Edgar allegedly did to get one of his wives. According to multiple chroniclers, Edgar heard about a beautiful woman named Ælfthryth. Now, Edgar was king, but he couldn't just show up unannounced to check her out. That would be undignified. So he did what any reasonable monarch would do. He sent one of his noblemen, a guy named Athelwold, to assess whether she was really as beautiful as the rumours claimed. Ethelwold arrived, took one look at Ælfthryth, and decided he wanted her for himself. So he went back to Edgar and reported that she was actually quite plain and not worth the king's time. Then Ethelwold promptly married her himself. For a while he got away with it, until Edgar decided he wanted to visit his nobleman's estate and meet this supposedly plain wife. Ethelwold panicked. He begged Ælfthryth to make herself look as unattractive as possible when the king arrived. But here's the thing. Ælfthryth was furious that Ethelwold had lied and trapped her in this marriage when she could have been queen. So when the king arrived, she did the exact opposite. She dressed in her finest clothes, wore her best jewellery, and made sure the king saw exactly how beautiful she was. Edgar immediately realised he'd been deceived. According to the chronicles, he invited Athelwold to go hunting in the woods. Just the two of them, alone. And Athelwold never came back. Edgar married Ælfthryth shortly after and went on to reign for 16 years and had multiple children. When he died in 975, though, more drama ensued, as you might expect. After Edgar's death, there was immediately a dispute over who should succeed him: his teenage son Edward from his first marriage, or his younger son Ethelred, who was Ælfthryth's child. The nobles chose Edward, who later would become known as Edward the Martyr. Edward, again, was just a teenager, 16 or 17 years old when he became king, and his reign lasted only 3 years before meeting a brutal end. Now, Ælfthryth, the woman that Edgar married, wanted her own son Ethelred on the throne instead of Edward. So, in the year 978, Edward was out hunting near Corfe Castle in Dorset. He decided to stop by the castle to visit his younger half-brother. As he approached on horseback, he was greeted by members of the household. They offered him a cup of drink, a gesture of hospitality. Edward accepted and raised the cup to his lips while still mounted on his horse. Then they struck. Multiple servants stabbed him while he was drinking. His horse, terrified by the sudden violence and the smell of blood, bolted. Edward's foot caught in the stirrup, and he was dragged along the ground as the horse ran. By the time the animal stopped, Edward was dead. His killers panicked. They couldn't let it be known that the king had been murdered on their property. So they secretly buried his body in a marshy area near the castle, hoping it would never be found. But it was found. Edward's body was discovered and later moved to a proper burial. Miracles were reported at his tomb, and he was eventually canonized as a saint. Edward the Martyr became a symbol of innocent youth destroyed by political ambition. With Edward dead, the throne finally passed to Athelred's son, just as she had always wanted. Meet Ethelred the Unready, who reigned from 978 to 1013, and then again from 1014 to 1016. Let's start with that nickname, the Unready. You'd think that being only 12 years old to ascend the throne would make anyone unready. But the actual Old English nickname was Unrad, which means poorly counselled or bad advice. It's actually a pun on his name. Ethelred means noble counsel, so calling him Unrad was a medieval burn. But Ethelred's worst decision? The one that haunted England for years? The St. Brice's Day Massacre. On November 13th, 1002, Ethelred ordered the killing of all Danes living in England. His reasoning was that he'd heard rumours of a Danish plot to overthrow him. So his solution was to order the massacre of every Danish person in the country. The violence was widespread and brutal. Churches were burned with people inside. Entire communities were slaughtered. Among the dead was a woman named Gunhilda, who happened to be the sister of Sweyn Forkbeard, the King of Denmark. You can imagine how that went down. Sweyn was absolutely furious. He launched a full-scale invasion of England to avenge his sister's murder. The conflict devastated the country for years. Ethelred tried to buy off the Vikings with enormous payments of silver, the infamous Danegeld. But it never worked for long. Eventually, Sweyn's forces were so dominant that Ethelred had to flee to Normandy in 1013, and he ended up losing his entire kingdom because of it. Poetic justice, really. This left Sweyn Forkbeard as the new King of England, the first Danish king. But here's the thing, Sweyn only ruled England for 5 weeks. After all that effort, all those battles, all that revenge for his sister, he barely got to enjoy being king. On February 3rd, 1014, Sweyn died. The official records say he fell off his horse, but legend tells a much more dramatic story. According to medieval chronicles, Sweyn was haunted by visions of St. Edmund, a previous king of East Anglia who had been murdered by Vikings decades earlier and was later canonized. On the night of his death, Sweyn supposedly saw the ghost of St. Edmund appear before him, holding a spear. The saint struck Sweyn down as divine punishment for his invasion and the destruction his armies had caused. Whether you believe in vengeful ghosts or not, the timing was remarkable. The man who'd spent years conquering England died almost immediately after achieving his goal. With Sweyn dead, Ethelred the Unready actually managed to return from exile and reclaim the throne. But Ethelred's second reign didn't last long either. When he died in 1016, his son took over. That son was called Edmund Ironside. Edmund earned his nickname Ironside through sheer fighting ability. When the Danes invaded again under Sweyn's son Canute, Edmund fought ferociously, winning multiple battles through personal bravery and strength. But he only reigned for 7 months,
and his death is one of the most disturbing in English history. According to multiple sources, Edmund was assassinated while using the toilet. An assassin allegedly hid in the cesspit beneath the royal latrine and waited for the king to sit down. When Edmund was at his most vulnerable, the killer thrust a sword or long dagger up through the hole and impaled him from below. The fierce warrior king, undefeated in battle, killed while taking a dump. With Edmund dead, Canute took full control of England. And Canute, he was something else entirely. Canute the Great reigned from 1016 to 1035. You probably know Canute from that story about the beach, the one where he demonstrates he can't control the tides. That story is often told wrong, by the way. It wasn't about arrogance, it was about humility. Canute's courtiers kept flattering him, saying he was all-powerful. So he took them to the beach, sat in his throne, and ordered the tide not to come in. When the waves soaked him anyway, he told his courtiers, "See, even a king can't command nature. Stop treating me like I'm God." But don't let that fool you. Canute was absolutely brutal when he needed to be. One of his first acts as king was dealing with Eadred Striona, a nobleman who'd spent years switching sides between the English and the Danes, betraying everyone for personal gain. Eadred had even helped Canute come to power, thinking he'd be rewarded. Instead, Canute had him executed. But he didn't stop there. Canute ordered Edric's body to be thrown over the walls of London so it could be eaten by dogs and birds. In medieval culture, a proper burial was essential for the soul's journey to the afterlife. Being left as carrion was the ultimate dishonor, a message to everyone else about what happens to traitors. Canute went on to become one of England's most powerful kings, ruling not just England, but also Denmark and Norway. He stabilized the country, promoted trade, and built strong ties with the church. But he never forgot the lesson of power. Be generous to your allies, but absolutely merciless to those who betray you. When Canute died, he left behind two sons from different marriages, Harold and Harthacnut. The kingdom was divided between them initially, but Harold acted as regent while his half-brother Harthacnut was stuck in Denmark. He was best known as Harold the Harefoot, which came from his speed as a runner. The guy was apparently incredibly fast. But his reign is remembered for one particularly brutal incident, involving a rival claimant to the throne. Alfred Etheling was the son of one of our earlier kings, Ethelred the Unready, and he had a legitimate claim to the English throne. In 1036, Alfred made the mistake of returning to England from Normandy, possibly to visit his mother or to press his claim. Harold's men swiftly captured Alfred and his companions. Alfred's followers were killed or sold into slavery. And as for Alfred himself, Harold had him blinded. Blinding was a common political punishment in the medieval period. It eliminated someone as a threat without technically killing them, which might avoid blood guilt or religious consequences. But the process was barbaric. Red-hot pokers or blades were used to destroy the eyes. Alfred didn't survive long after his blinding. He died shortly afterward from his wounds at Ely. His brother Edward, who would later become king, never forgot what happened. Harold Harefoot himself died in 1040, possibly from illness, having never been fully accepted as legitimate king by many of the English nobility. His death gave rise to his half-brother Harthacnut, who reigned from 1040 to 1042. One of his first acts was incredibly petty and disturbing. He was furious about how Harold Harefoot had treated him, claiming the throne while he was away. So Harthacnut ordered Harold's body to be dug up from its grave. The corpse was exhumed, and then, in a display of posthumous revenge, Harthacnut had it beheaded. The body was then thrown into a marsh. Some chroniclers say it was later recovered and given a proper burial, but the message was clear: Harthacnut did not forgive, even in death.
But Harthacnut's reign was also notable for its taxation. He needed to pay off his fleet and army, so he imposed crushing taxes on the English people. When the citizens of Worcester refused to pay, Harthacnut sent an army to burn the city down and kill its inhabitants. The brutality made him deeply unpopular. However, Harthacnut only reigned for 2 years. In 1042, at a wedding feast, he was drinking and apparently having a good time when he suddenly collapsed. He died right there at the party, aged only about 24. With no heirs, the throne passed to his half-brother, Edward. Yes, that same Edward whose brother Alfred had been murdered by Harold Harefoot. He was known as Edward the Confessor and reigned from 1042 to 1066, a whopping 24 years on the throne. After all the violence, murder and chaos of previous reigns, Edward was different. He was deeply religious, so much so that he was later canonized as a saint. His nickname, the Confessor, referred to his piety. In medieval terminology, a confessor was someone who lived a holy life and confessed their faith, as opposed to a martyr who died for it. But here's the fascinating thing about Edward. He may have never consummated his marriage. Edward married Edith of Wessex in 1045, but they never had children. Medieval sources suggest the marriage remained celibate throughout their lives. Some historians argue Edward took a vow of chastity and lived more like a monk than a king. Others suggest there might have been political reasons. Without children, Edward had no clear heir. As he aged, various nobles and foreign princes began circling, each claiming they'd been promised the throne. Edward supposedly promised it to William, Duke of Normandy, but the English nobility preferred Harold Godwinson. Others claimed Edward had promised it to them. The succession crisis that Edward left behind would lead directly to one of the most famous dates in English history, 1066. Edward died on January 5th, 1066, after a brief illness. He was buried in his greatest achievement, Westminster Abbey, which he'd spent years building. But his death triggered a conflict that would change England forever. Harold Godwinson was crowned king immediately after Edward's death, literally the next day. He was the most powerful nobleman in England, but his claim was immediately disputed. Harold Hardrada, King of Norway, invaded the north, claiming the throne. At almost the same time, William of Normandy was preparing an invasion from the south. Harold was caught between two enemies, both with large armies. First, Harold marched north at incredible speed and met Hardrada at the Battle of Stamford Bridge on September 25th, 1066. In one of medieval England's most spectacular battles, Harold completely destroyed the Viking army. Hardrada was killed, and the invasion was crushed. Harold should have been celebrating. Instead, news arrived that William of Normandy had landed on the south coast. Harold's exhausted army had to turn around and march over 200 miles south to face a completely fresh enemy. The next month, the two armies met at Hastings. The battle raged for hours. Harold's forces held strong on a hill, forming a shield wall that the Normans couldn't break. But then something happened. Whether it was a clever tactic by William or just chaos of battle, we're not sure. But part of Harold's line broke and pursued Norman soldiers down the hill. The Norman cavalry turned and slaughtered them. The shield wall collapsed, and Harold, according to tradition, he was killed by an arrow to the eye, though some sources suggest he was hacked to pieces by Norman knights. What we know for certain is that Harold died on that battlefield, and with him died Anglo-Saxon England. William of Normandy, later known as William the Conqueror, took the throne, and the Norman era began. But we'll save that one for another video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this dive into the absolute chaos of early English history, let me know in the comments which monarch's story shocked you the most. And if you want more historical insanity, hit that subscribe button. Because trust me, history only gets wilder from here.